Hey everybody, today is Friday, August 4th, 2023. Friday? Who does a podcast on a Friday? Coming up on the show today, from Oppenheimer, editor Jennifer Lame.
My whole thing is like people in rooms talking. Like Tenet is not my thing. So when he told me about the project and I'd already taken Wakanda Forever, I literally like slammed the table and I was like, are you kidding me? Because he literally said, I'm about to make a movie with people in rooms talking. He wouldn't tell me what the script was about. We just had lunch and he said, I'm working on a script with people in rooms talking. And I was like, that's all I want to do.
Additional editor Mike Fay.
I think for Tarantino with Hateful Eight and some of his 70 pictures, he's going for a larger kind of composition, kind of a different approach. I think Chris's approach is very much like Jen was saying, to keep the story moving. And for that, we're constantly moving forward and cutting all over the room. Lingering in a shot because of its quality or resolution was sort of secondary.
First assistant editor Nick Ellsberg.
At the tail end of Bullet Train, Mike called me and was like, look, something big is coming up. I can't tell you what it is yet, but if this is happening, do you want to do it? And I was like, well, what could it possibly be? What's bigger than like what we're doing right now? And I was like, I bet it's a Chris Nolan movie.
And first assistant film editor Tom Foligno.
You know, when I saw the dailies coming in, they had all the earmarks of a real classic picture, the way it was shot. It just gave me this feeling that, oh my God, this is something that's going to be so great.
Yes, all that and more in this edition of The Rough Cut. Hey there, kids. Matt Fury here. Good to see you. You know what? Everyone else is playing up the whole Barbenheimer thing. I figured I should jump on that train too. Yes, we had Barbie on Monday in the usual Rough Cut podcast slot. I thought we should cap the week off with Oppenheimer. There is no doubt this is a film I got a lot of messages about, all saying, you're doing Oppenheimer, right? But even more so, this is an editor, Jennifer Lame, who I've gotten many inquiries about over the years, and with good reason. Her work on the films Manchester by the Sea and Marriage Story, brilliant. Just a really gifted editor when it comes to powerful, dramatic, intimate moments happening between characters. Clearly, Christopher Nolan appreciates her skills because he brought her on to do Tenet, and now, of course, Oppenheimer. Jen's been killing it for a while now, so you ask, why did you wait this long to bring her on? Well, not my choice. I would have loved, and still would, to talk to her about those films I mentioned. But she's just not crazy about doing interviews. And you'll hear her say that in this one. And talking to me probably didn't help fix that, but at least I finally got a chance to talk to her. And not just her. Jen brought along many of her talented Oppenheimer colleagues. First, there's Mike Fay, who has logged a lot of time on big movies as an assistant and VFX editor. He was handpicked by Jen to kick off the editorial work on Oppenheimer, and Jen and Mike will explain all that. Then we also have first assistant editors Nick Ellsberg and Tom Foligno. Nick took care of all the digital editing assistant duties, whereas Tom, a veteran of film editing and working with director Martin Scorsese, was tasked with handling the film editing component of Oppenheimer. Because, as I know you know, Nolan not only likes to shoot on film, he likes to screen dailies on film. And not just film, 70mm IMAX. Or is it 65? I think the film is 65 and that it's projected as 70. I don't know. Like a lot of people, I'm rusty on my film processes and terminology. But Tom and Nick will help us all get up to speed. Now, if you have not seen Oppenheimer, let me give you the wiki entry on it. Based on the 2005 biography American Prometheus by Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin, the story predominantly focuses on Oppenheimer's early studies, his direction of the Manhattan Project during World War II, and his eventual fall from grace due to his 1954 security hearing, all of which are juxtaposed with events surrounding Oppenheimer's relationship with Lewis Strauss, a senior member of the United States Atomic Energy Commission who sees Oppenheimer as a rival. The film stars Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer and Robert Downey Jr. as Strauss. So there you go. So much to unpack and dig into on this one. But before we do, I cannot help but notice that the little red light on the Rough Cut virtual answering machine is blinking. So let's see who it is. It's probably spam, I don't know.
You have one new message. To listen to your messages, press 1. For first, new message.
Hey Matt, long-time listener, first-time caller. That counts for podcasts, right? As an editor, I despise hearing my own voice, but the temptation to receive something cool can make a guy do just about anything. Am I right? First, I want to thank you so much for all the work you do. This podcast is invaluable to me, both as a professional and a fan. I've learned so much that I don't think I really could anywhere else. I work primarily in sports and docs, usually sports docs, who would figure. I've cut for NFL, MLB, and NASCAR. So I just wanted to plant the seed or incept the idea, whatever works best, to see if you may be able to talk with any prominent sports series editors. Hard Knocks is the big one that comes to mind with the season coming up, but also Netflix had a couple recent shows, Full Swing, the golf one, and Quarterback, which would both be, I think, pretty fascinating case studies. These shows manage so much material, juggling storylines and characters, and do all of that while managing to infuse some cool cutting. So as someone who battles those things daily, I'd love to get some insights of the people doing it at the highest level. I know Doc isn't as sexy as scripted, but even in my commercial stuff, a lot of our projects lean more into like finding gems and crafting story from a long interview or archive stuff rather than a scripted shoot. So would love to hear about people doing similar stuff. All right, long love letter over. Again, appreciate what you do, and send my thanks to the guys at Extreme Music with an office near me.
Aw, an audio love letter. Can't get enough of those. All right, well, first, thank you for the kind words about the show. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you appreciating the people on the show. I'm sure they appreciate you appreciating them as well. In regards to your suggestion, well, you're right. I can't say I've covered sports or sports-themed content, or sport-themed for my UK friends. So that's a good suggestion, I think. And I admit, one that has come in before, a while ago, I believe. And if that guy's still listening to this podcast, he's probably thinking, well, you didn't do anything about it before, why should I believe you now? Can't argue with that. But I'll give it a shot. I don't know. What do you all think? This is your show. Sound good to you? I do ask for your feedback and suggestions, don't I? On that note, lastly, dear caller, I can't agree that I would do anything if someone sent me something cool, but I do recall at one time, way back in the early days of the podcast, I said that if people left me messages, I would send them, quote, something cool. That was dumb. Probably why I stopped saying that. But a deal's a deal. So let's wander on over to the rough cut closet of curios and antiquities and see what I got. Oh, man. I forgot most of this junk was in here. What is this? Oh, no, I'll need that. Is that a sandwich? Ooh, shouldn't have opened that one. Ugh. I don't know, man. I can't handle this right now. I'll look around later. But don't worry, cool stuff is on the way. Speaking of cool stuff, what is cooler than great production audio? Not much, and certainly nothing I have around here. But whether you're working on a big biopic or a sports TV show, one of the best things you can do to up your game is to have great music as the backbone of your story. Our longtime friends and Rough Cut sponsor Extreme Music are always standing by to provide film and TV makers like you magical audio tracks crafted by the most talented people working in the fields of producing and composing. With a catalog that grows bigger and better by the day, their simple-to-use website makes it so, well, simple, I guess, to find just what you need, all by searching on musical terminology like instrumentation, beats per minute, lyrics, genre, composer. And even if those terms seem like Greek to you, what do you suppose they say in Greece when they don't understand something? Noodle on that and get back to me. But if you find yourself musically challenged, yet you know what you like, well, you can take those tracks that you like and upload them to Extreme Music. Their intrinsic audio intuition will search that catalog and find you tracks just like them. And if it's inspiration you're looking for, and who isn't, make sure to check out Extreme Music's Spotify playlist and get a sample of just some of the great music they have to offer. You know the rest. You can license those tracks right there on their website, or get help from a real person in an office near you. And then you can leave a message on the Rough Cut website and joke about it. But your next TV show or movie is no joke, so make the most of it with great tracks from Extreme Music. Okay, this one was a long time coming, and I am so happy it finally happened. From Oppenheimer, here's Jennifer Lame, Mike Fay, Nick Ellsberg, and Tom Foligno.
You can listen to it later on the podcast.
Yeah.
You're going to edit this stuff out, though, right, Matt?
No, this is staying in.
We're live right now.
Yeah, we're live.
Wait, what? We're not live, are we?
No.
Okay, all right.
It's the last time Jen's going to talk to me.
Right.
Jen works best under pressure and believes everything she's told.
You know, like we were talking about, even with the pedigree of Christopher Nolan and the kind of movie this is and the cast that you have, you never know. I mean, you can place a pretty good bet that this is going to be an amazing movie, which it was. But Jen, I'd just like to know your reaction to the script as well as the concept and how Chris pitched it to you and if you had any concerns about taking on this project.
I read the script and I really loved it. And no, I had no concerns about taking on the project. I mean, I was on another movie, so I had concerns that I wasn't going to be able to do the project. But I came on late, and Mike Fay actually helped with cutting scenes, so I could come on late. So that was the only concern, is that I wasn't available when he told me about the project. I'd already taken another movie. But he let me come on late. And yeah, and I read the script and I loved it. My whole thing is like people in rooms talking. Like Tenet is not my thing. So when he told me about the project and I'd already taken Wakanda Forever, I literally like slammed the table and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Because he literally said, "I'm about to make a movie with people in rooms talking." Because I hadn't read the script yet. He wouldn't tell me what the script was about. We just had lunch and he said, "I'm working on a script with people in rooms talking." And I was like, "That's all I want to do." So that was the only conflict because I'd already taken Wakanda Forever. But he was really kind to work it out. And I went on this epic search for Mike, which was really stressful because I had to find someone that Chris would like, that understood film, that could handle the stress of a dailies trailer. Because John Lee, the first assistant, was he had left. So I was in like a major quandary of just like I had to find somebody. It was my only second movie with Chris. John had been with Chris for how many movies? Like all of them?
A lot of them.
Since Batman Begins, yeah, for 15 years.
Since Batman Begins. Yeah, so he was so used to John. And yeah, it's just a workflow that nobody understands. And John is so OCD. So I was just like, oh my God. And it was kind of on me to find the person, which was also kind of crazy because I was working on Wakanda Forever. And also, I was also trying to find someone who could fill in for me. So I was trying to find a replacement for John Lee, which was already impossible, and someone who could fill in for me while I came on late. It was quite stressful. There was a moment where I was like, maybe I just shouldn't even do this because I didn't want to be responsible for if I found somebody and they didn't like them. Like, I didn't know what I would do. It was really stressful.
It's funny, guys, you wouldn't think that a show like Ballers would have anything to do with a film like Oppenheimer, and yet somehow it does. I know Jen's origin story with Chris. For all of you guys, I don't see any common projects with Jen, so I'd love to know how you got on this film, and yet somehow you all know each other. So why don't we start with you, Nick? How did you get this gig?
Well, you'd have to go back 5 years now when I worked on John Wick 3 with Evan Schiff. I worked on it in New York, and Evan convinced me to move to LA to stay working on it. And Mike, who I sort of knew from New York, but he had moved to LA a long time ago. I actually knew his wife. He was working on John Wick 3 as the VFX editor. And Tom, who's also a New York guy, but had also moved out to LA a long time ago, he had filled in for Mike and ended up coming back on as an additional VFX editor. And so we all kind of became really tight on that job. And then since then, I've only worked with those two guys.
Cannot get away.
We all went on to Ballers after that, which was in the same building at EPS. And then Mike got a call about the Ghostbusters with Jason Reitman. And he was like, "Nick, do you want to do Ghostbusters?" And I was like, "Yes, I want to do Ghostbusters." And then we both got called by Evan to do Bullet Train. He was starting the assembly on Bullet Train, and Mike was VFX editor on that. I was the first on Bullet Train. And then at the tail end of Bullet Train, Mike called me and was like, "Look, something big is coming up. I can't tell you what it is yet. I don't want to jinx it. But if this is happening, like, do you want to do it?" And I was like, "What could it possibly be? What's bigger than like what we're doing right now?" And I was like, "I bet it's a Chris Nolan movie."
Yeah, you totally figured it out.
I was like, what could be bigger than that? And I was like, okay. And so he was like, "Yeah, I want you to come on and handle, the Avid side." There's a whole long, complicated story that I'm sure the other guys can fill you in on how everything came into place. But Mike was the General Groves for sure of this Manhattan project, assembling the dream team.
All right, Mike. Nick did a great job of filling in a lot of the blanks, but fill in some of the rest of them for how you got on the big super secret film that you couldn't tell anybody about.
Exactly. It's weird. I mean, we do all have this New York connection to us. Like Jen is a former New Yorker. I am a former New Yorker. So is Nick. So is Tom. We just had a whole cadre of us on this film. But Jen reached out to me in November of 2021, and she had got my name from some friends back east, some friends here in LA, and had just asked me about doing Oppenheimer. And she broke it down as to what she needed. My predecessor, John Lee, as she mentioned, had been with Chris, working with Lee Smith for 15 years. And John was really this rock in Chris's world of keeping this workflow running smoothly. And John's amazing. Then John started cutting. So John moved on, and Jen was looking for someone to kind of take over, but then also needed someone to cut while she was finishing Wakanda Forever. It was definitely daunting. The workflow itself is very challenging, but then the prospect of having to cut dailies and assemble as much of the picture as I could, before she came on was daunting as well. But I think like the rest of the guys, when I read the script, I knew that this was a special project. I knew that this was a once in a lifetime kind of project. As daunting as it was, I was like, I want to jump in. I have to do this. And as soon as that happened, my mind went to Nick and to Tom and to who are my guys that I knew that I trusted, that if I'm going to be going into battle, who do I want with me? And it was these guys. I'm so happy that we've stuck together and been able to go on to other things and that they were able to do this. It was literally a dream team. It was a dream come true, and I couldn't be happier.
And Tom, for you getting that phone call, your reaction to that and your thoughts going into this project about how you needed to prepare for it.
I think Mike had me down for possibly working as an Avid assistant, maybe another Avid assistant. And then the film crew, which had been a longtime crew of Nolan's, they decided not to come back. And so the light bulb went off. I might have been talking to you, Nick, and it was like, wait a second. You've worked in film before. Yeah, like 25 years ago, yes. When I started, there was nothing but film. There were no computers at all. So, we did everything on film. Sound as well as picture was on film. So Mike asked me, and I answered immediately, I think. I didn't even have to think about it. I said, whatever you're involved in, I want to be involved in. I don't care what it is. I didn't read the script. I couldn't read the script. They wouldn't let you read the script. So I saw the script come in as line script. So each day I read the piece that they did and pieced it together. I never really had a script per se to read, but I could tell as it was coming in that it was something very special. I guess I just sort of backed into this film thing. It wasn't like that was what I was intended to do, but I think it worked out. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, what Tom said at the time, and I'll never forget, when Mike was explaining just what it was going to involve, he said, "Hey, I'm not afraid of this." And it's because he'd been through 10 years of the Scorsese Thelma Schoonmaker camp, so he'd been put through the paces. He already knew everything he needed to know.
During the downtime, did you guys all ask Tom what it was like to work on Casino?
Of course.
That's what I would do. Mike, in this situation where Jen is coming on late and you're having to kick things off, is there a process that you have to go through to not necessarily do a handoff, but get her integrated into what's already taken place?
Yeah, it was basically assembling as much as I could in time for when she joined us and getting her to a place that, she was able to take everything that I had done and do her pass. When she joined in the middle of May, I had about 110 minutes already to go, and there was still a lot to do. And so she came on and started working through what I had not gotten to at that point, and then was working through everything that I had done at that point to really familiarize herself with all the footage and just get ready for Chris to walk in the door.
When I was watching the film, the pacing, it's a 3-hour movie, but it moves so quickly because you're constantly seamlessly transitioning from one thing to another.
Yeah, I think when you're dealing with like a 3-hour biopic based on like a ginormous topic and a ginormous book, pacing is a problem. And that was always a problem that we were faced with, of just like, I think honestly, a lot of people felt like earlier drafts of the movie felt too fast, which is hilarious because it obviously was longer than 3 hours for quite a long time. So yeah, it was just like, how do you make people feel like they're not being rushed through something, but also not make this a 4-hour movie? Although it was never even close to 4 hours. I think like the assembly was like do you remember what it was, Mike? Was it like 3:40 or something? 3:30?
I want to say it was like 3:25 or something.
Yeah, I think it was closer to that.
Yeah, but the assembly was like, so it was just kind of like, but cutting out 25 minutes in this type of movie is not easy. So it's just like, how do you not make people feel rushed, but you also make people feel like they're on this journey? And then It's like, how do you make people feel like they can connect with the character? And when your pacing is quite hurried in a way, not hurried, but like the movie is paced quite quickly. So you don't want people to feel like they can't connect or like sit in a scene and feel like they're kind of getting everything. Cause there's also quite a lot of information that's tricky, like especially in this day and age. It's like McCarthy is atomic bomb versus hydrogen bomb, fission versus fusion, Robert Downey Jr., the Senate aide, getting on a cabinet of a presidency. Like, it's a lot. It's not like easy information to digest. So it was very challenging.
I mean, I think Jen has an innate talent for taking all of this material and making it as brisk as it was. I remember when you started, Jen, just kind of going through with you with stuff and watching you immediately leap in and start working and taking everything and just simplifying, condensing and abbreviating and getting things moving. I think you were going off of the feeling you got when you read the script, which is the sense of speed and urgency, and just putting that into the film. That was kind of an amazing process to watch as you dove in and just started just going to town.
I also come from a school of your first cut is like a fine cut. Like I'm not someone who just I've never assembled like a long cut, if that makes sense. And Chris actually knows that about me. So when he saw the length of my cut, he was actually worried because he was like, oh, Jesus, if your cut's 3 hours and 25 minutes, like we're fucked because he knows that I already cut quite tightly just because I come from that like Noah Baumbach world of just like fast talking and also I usually work with directors who don't watch assemblies. So what they do is like you put the movie together as best you can and like cut scenes. And I have the whole movie ready to go, but it's not like you're assembling, if that makes sense, where you put in like music and sound effects and you just like throw long shots together. Like I try to cut the scenes as best I can and then put them together and not worry about sound and music. And Chris, I guess, knew that about me for Tenet. So
for you, Nick, give me an example of how the cutting rooms are set up for audio and for picture.
Well, this was kind of a unique situation because Mike and I actually went on location. So Mike actually started working on it way before I did. He was kind of early days of pre-production. He was very involved in camera tests and meetings with Chris and producers, and was very involved because what people don't necessarily realize is Chris screens dailies every day on film, on set. And so that is a huge logistical challenge that's also really worthwhile. It's really fantastic. This was the first film ever that interlocked Pro Tools to play back uncompressed audio with film projectors. We did it for dailies, and then we ended up using it all throughout the director's cut. And we used the legacy biphase port on the Sync HD hardware and made that sync up to our film projectors. And we were able to use it for screenings. So we could screen work print before we had a DTS track. But one of the very first things we had to do was figure out, okay, where are we going to set up the cutting rooms that will also be the film cutting rooms? Because we were going to start during production having everyone together. Then when we go into production, we move to Chris has a house where we edit at and keep the film room separate because they need a lot of space. So that was one of the first things we did is tour different locations. We ended up working out of Digital Vortex, who was provided Avids for every one of Chris's films, and they're a great vendor. But then the first thing we had to do was figure out, okay, where are we going to work when we're in Santa Fe, which was going to be the bulk of the production. So Mike was like frantically speaking to production coordinators, being like, we got to find like a condo somewhere to set up a room. It ended up being, we just kind of had to like really figure things out on the fly. It felt like everything worked out kind of perfectly. Like the editing process on Chris's movies is such an operation and such a machine. And he kind of likes to do things the same way each time. Going into post, everything was kind of already decided, like, this is where it's going to be. This is how you're going to set it up. This is the equipment you're going to use. So there wasn't a lot of guesswork and being like, okay, what should we do this time around? It had already kind of been decided, which in a way was sort of nice. Obviously, we made some tweaks, some changes here and there, and trial and error throughout the production process. But basically, it was like, this is the facility you're going to work at, and this is how we set it up. So that's basically how we approached it.
Yeah, that being said, I mean, during production, we were moving every 2-3 weeks, as the company moved, we were following along. And I think looking back, I had the most avids on this show that I've ever had in my life.
Never enough, Mike. Never enough.
Right, exactly. I think I had 15 different avids from the condo in Santa Fe to an office in Albuquerque to the back of our dailies trailer, cutting on an iMac. I'm so used to kind of having a home base as an editor where it's kind of your little nook where you cut. But on this show, I was a nomad. We were nomadic, just kind of moving from place to place.
Yeah.
Literally like out in the middle of the desert in the back of an 18-wheeler, which is our dailies trailer where we screen dailies. I put an iMac in there. And Vortex was amazing with their support for us. I mean, we were moving all the time in these far-flung, domestic locations, but they still, at the drop of a hat, could get us what we needed when we threw them curveballs, and they were fantastic.
Yeah. Can we just give a quick shout out to our huge team?
Sure.
Yes.
I'd like to acknowledge them by name. Like on the Avid side, we had Scott Ross, was just invaluable, who worked on also almost all of Chris's films going back to the Batman days. And we also had Jay Troutman and Ed Marsh, VFX and Extractions editor, who just were awesome. They were just so great. And in the film room, working with Tom, Mike Wilson, Ray Bonaker, and Andrew Bluestain, who just also above and beyond, and can't imagine having gotten through the process without them.
And James Brewer as well. We had James was on.
Jim Brewer, yeah.
Yep.
Was during dailies, yeah.
During dailies.
He also was great.
An amazing team.
Part of the why this movie moves so quickly is the structure that you have, this intercutting that you do in this kind of nonlinear narrative and different time periods. Is it liberating to have that kind of nonlinearity to work with, and that maybe there's more flexibility to play with the story, or is it more challenging because you have to kind of spend more time finding that story within?
I think it's like a little bit of both, but I think with Chris's scripts, and again, like I also tend to work with writer directors, which is quite fun because it's like their baby, but also weirdly, I feel like most writer directors I've worked with are kind of okay with killing their babies to some degree. But anyway, the point being is like the movie is very much Chris's, like he spends a lot of time structuring that script before it's shot. So like the intimidating thing about scripts like that is making that come to fruition, because he like spent a lot of time writing that. He's like, he knows that he shot it. So it's like he expects that it'll be great. Like a lot of those sequences and that structure is built into the script. And then of course, once we put it all together and get it working, then we sometimes move things around. So it's liberating as an editor to just like have this great script that I can then just like dive into the scenes and play around, and like all of the cutting between the timelines is in the script. It's not like I'm making that, you know what I mean? Like I'm not making that up. But then once I put it in Chris's order, like, and it was actually helpful that I wasn't on a shoot, because I was able to come in and be like, well, this doesn't make sense. And this is a little confusing, because I was like such fresh eyes. So I was able to point out a couple of problems and like little things. But like Chris, obviously, really, his scripts are pretty tight in terms of like what he shoots and then what we edit. So when you move things around, it's a big deal and it's kind of fun, but it's quite difficult to move things around.
Something else that I think has gotten a lot of coverage about this film is how it was shot, doing the 70 millimeter IMAX, which if you're one of the lucky people that's able to see it in that format, go do it. For you, Jen, I'm going to assume that dailies are dailies, and to you, finding the story is all that's on your mind. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But how did you manage the different formats in the cutting room?
Well,
yes, that's the trick. Well, I worked on the film in the film room, a whole division in actually another place, sort of in between where they were cutting the film on the Avid and where the lab was processing the film. We had a big place where we would store all that film. There was a lot of different formats of film. I mean, primarily with the IMAX 15 perf and the 5 perf 70. And then we also, VFX also shot some 35 millimeter, which we incorporated into the show as well. So it's like three. And then both IMAX and the 5 perf 70 had black and white and color. And that was a whole other challenge, because that was something that, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, it was never done before. Shooting black and white
65,
65.
I think they may have done it on Tron to shoot background plates for the original Tron.
Doesn't count.
Yeah, but not the way that we did it.
And there were some problems, but, eventually we got through it. But yeah, it was, for me, it was something that, when I saw the dailies coming in, they had all the earmarks of a real classic picture, the way it was shot. Because I worked for Scorsese a long time ago when he was shooting on film. He would rarely shoot two cameras. Chris never shot two cameras. It reminded me so much of that. And also the way it was coming in and the way he was shooting it just gave me this feeling that, oh my God, this is something that's going to be really great. I haven't seen this in a long time. I stopped working for Scorsese a long time ago, and I came out here to working on TV shows and with 3 cameras and just get what you can. And there it is. This was so great to see somebody still doing this kind of filmmaking. I was really happy to have gotten on the show. And, I somehow remembered how to do all that stuff with the slicers and synchronizers and benches. And it was, I could still do it.
Thank God. Somebody's got it.
There's a couple of people.
Jumping forward into the digital realm, Nick, managing those elements in the timeline, does it place any kind of burden on you as the assistant to sort of manage that stuff within the Avid?
Yes. Luckily we were standing on the shoulders of giants. So John Lee, Eric Louie, our predecessors had really worked out a lot of systems to help keep it straight. And we kind of inherited some of that we ended up adapting and using. But basically, in the film side, the formats, it's readily apparent which format you're holding. The 5-perf looks a certain way. We never handled the 15-perf film. It was always a 35 millimeter reduction, but you can physically hold it and see that it's a different format. In the Avid, obviously a master clip is a master clip and takes are takes. And we would have things telecine in their native projection app. And then we would change depending on how we were viewing it, using resize tools and stuff like that in the Avid. But basically using Avid's color coding system, you could differentiate very clearly between what was an IMAX shot, what was a 35 millimeter shot, what was a 70 millimeter 5-perf shot.
I saw a DGA talk between Christopher Nolan and Quentin Tarantino, and Tarantino said that working with 70 millimeter meant that he didn't have to cut as much because there's so much more information in the frame. Did you feel that? Like when you're working with this format, does it feel like you want to linger a little more with a shot because of all that detail?
No, I don't think so. When you screen the print, no doubt it's beautiful and you're aware of the increased resolution. But when you're cutting it, I think you're really following the characters, you're following their eyes, and you're following the story. The quality, the resolution of the footage is a little bit less. I think for Tarantino with Hateful Eight and some of his 70 pictures, he's going for a larger kind of composition, kind of a different approach. I think Chris's approach is very much like Jen was saying, to keep the story moving. And for that, we're constantly moving forward and cutting all over the room. Lingering in a shot because of its quality or its resolution was sort of secondary.
There are, some moments for sure where you lean on the IMAX. There's Jen's favorite shot in the movie of the 3 guys on horseback going up the mountain, for example. You can kind of lean into like, oh yeah, you're this huge vista and then finding little details in it. It definitely lends itself to that. But what's kind of great about the way I think Chris and Hoyt shot it is not treating it like it's a nature documentary.
Yeah.
The pace is absolutely not impacted by just wanting to sit back and look at how beautiful the vistas are. But you have this kind of built-in sort of landing pad that's available to you.
Obviously, with digital, I can let the camera run forever. I can do as many takes as I want. I'm not really concerned with that. Do you find that with film that's different? And especially now with IMAX and single camera, does it feel like you're getting less coverage or at least more specific, thought through coverage?
He still shoots a good amount of takes. If he needs to, he doesn't let it hold him back. But I think Chris, not to speak for him, but I think he does like constraints. I think that's why he likes the film process. It's like there's boundaries and there's limits, and he works within them and he uses them to be creative. And it's really nice. Having worked with directors that shoot insane amounts of footage, it's so nice to work with someone who has constraints and uses those constraints, and it's just so fun.
Yeah, and our loads on the 15 perf are 3 minutes, I think, is the runtime.
Yeah.
So as soon as that camera's rolling, they are into action and into the scene as quickly as possible. It is a refreshing thing to get back to a set of takes that are just condensed down to really what's needed and not just let's reset and go back to one and do it again. We would always have, I think maybe we did a reset here and there, but it was very rare. It was always cutting and then resetting.
Yeah.
Takes would not run on forever. And I think Chris is very thoughtful about what he's shooting and gets what he knows he needs. And yeah, I mean, he'll get the certain number of takes that he needs, but in terms of setups, he's very aware of what he's getting and not just shooting 5 cameras to cover it,
Yeah. You would get very thoughtful stuff. It's very economical. It wasn't like we're just, throwing stuff against the wall. It was, they were, knew exactly what you needed, and had great actors, and they could nail it in the first couple of takes or whatever. So it turns into you don't have to shoot that much. And then when you're editing, that's really great because you don't have all the 100 choices for cuts. It's there. It's, I like this take. That's it. And, it makes it a lot easier for everybody if you have someone who's like a master at making movies. And that's, I think, what he is. And I've seen it a few times in my life, but not much. And this is one of them I'm really happy about.
Chris is so efficient. Like he's just like whole thing is like time. He is kind of obsessed with time on like, so I think what I also love working with him, and I'm sure these guys can speak to it too, it is like dates never move. We hit our dates. We have certain weeks for everything. Like he's just so efficient on every level of the process, not just with his efficiency in shooting, but also like all the way to finishing the movie. So it's like so incredibly refreshing to work with the director where like we do not move dates, we do not move previews, we do not move picture lock, we do not move sound mixing. Like every other movie I've been on, those dates are always in flux, they're always moving. And it just allows you to be incredibly creative because you don't have to worry about that stuff. And you don't also have to worry like, oh, this could go on forever. We could change things forever. It's like we have those screenings every Friday. Like it's this adrenaline rush. It's like hyper focusing in a way that I've never hyper focused on a job before, which is just really fun.
It's interesting to hear you say that, Jen, because you hear so much from his actors about the production process and how structured and almost austere it is on set and that everybody is really there to work. Does that change the way you work in the cutting room at all or your process in editorial?
Every minute we're in the room, we're working. I mean, we're still talking and it's not unpleasant. In fact, I find it really pleasant, especially as you get older and you have kids and you have a family. It's like, it's nice to know that like from the minute I get there to the minute I leave, even if we're not physically editing and we're just meandering and talking about something else, it's all towards working. I really appreciate that because our jobs are hard. They're long hours. We all have families. It's not easy. And so it's nice when you work with someone that's respectful of time. And that every minute you're there, even if you're there late, it's for a reason. So yeah, I find it really nice. It's so nice to show up at work every day and just like feel like we're going to get a lot done. It's a good feeling.
There's an element that pervades the film or elements, and that is these visuals of particles and waves. You're really looking at the world from Oppenheimer's perspective, and you're almost sort of seeing these things that he's imagining. Tell me about any sort of guidelines you had in terms of how and when to use them.
Those were written into scenes, but yeah, that was a creative process of figuring out when and how to cut those in. And like, I would say that montage was very like free flowing. And like, I remember recutting it completely on a Saturday and just like hanging out with Chris and cutting it and talking and playing. Like all of that stuff was really fun and creative and exciting. And Chris is fun to do that stuff with because he just wants you to play. Like, he'll just say like, give it a play and like wander out into his backyard and come back for 45 minutes later. So yeah, I think all of that stuff is just like feeling the rhythm and like it's very hard to talk about editing on some level because it's just like you just have to throw yourself into like the character's brain and just try things in terms of rhythm and it's just like trial and error and just like once you get it you're like, oh, that works. Now I feel like we're actually going inside his brain. It doesn't feel like an edit I just made where it feels very, do you know what I mean? It's like you have to just keep trying until it feels organic and not like you're telling somebody to feel some way. And I feel like I had like a little bit, I feel like because I did Manchester by the Sea, like I had some kind of feeling for what that was like. Cause that was kind of the first time I really played around with time and that was stressful and it's hard. And it's like, you really, like the big lesson I took from Manchester and working with Kenny is just like, when you play around with time and you cut back and forth, it can't feel like manipulative. It has to feel like emotional. And it's just so much trial and error of like making sure that that's how it feels. but it's kind of hard to talk about. Or it's not very fun to talk about.
I'm trying to make it fun.
No, I know, but that's why I do so few interviews, because it's like such a hard, weird thing to talk about. It's like talking about like playing the piano or something. It's like, yeah, you just like practice a lot and then like you get better at it. But it's like I can't. Sometimes it's kind of boring to talk about.
Editing is like anything. You practice it and you get better at it.
Yeah.
Well, it's not just the visuals that are nonlinear, also a lot of audio elements. The one that stood out to me is you hear this foot stomping sound, and you don't even know it's feet stomping. It just almost sounds like a slow train approaching until it's finally revealed to be feet stomping of a crowd listening to Oppenheimer's post-bombing speech. What was the origin story for that element?
That was definitely in the script. Can't take credit for that. I mean, someone who can speak to the footsteps is Mike, because he was tortured by those footsteps.
Yeah.
That was written to be an audio motif in the script. And Chris recorded a ton of it live in that room that you see. And all the sounds you're hearing is from those people. But yeah, Mike had to constantly make string outs of that. It was so challenging. And it's so funny. In all of his movies, there's always something. I'm trying to think of what it was on Tenet. I mean, it was like all the backwards and forwards audio, but like there's always something like that. Every time we made a cut, Mike would have to like make his steps again. He was like the step man. Like I could never do it. He was like, just call Mike, just call Mike. Oh, because you had started it before I came on with that teaser.
Yeah, I mean that we had shot, a whole bunch of that, but we needed to be able to have control over the time and the tempo and how it ramped up and when it ramped up. And the interesting thing about that was the crowd, when we shot that, they have an inherent sense as to when they want to accelerate themselves, which is pretty quickly. It doesn't linger and kind of go like that train, a slow chugga, how we wanted it to go. So it was just trying to take all the recordings we had of it, which is all production. I think actually we maybe did do some Foley.
I don't know if we ever used it.
Yeah, it may have been kind of for sparse moments here and there, but mining all of those takes to sort of elongate it and stretch it and build it, and just so Jen and Chris had all of the different speeds and were able to kind of slowly build that up.
Yeah, it's kind of like the spine of the movie. It continues to call back throughout. You hear it in the middle of the movie when they're around that table and they're looking at all the charts where you could bomb things and how much you could destroy, and it was in black and white. It's a bunch of times in the movie that stomping comes back. Even at the end, I think. Isn't there something at the very end?
Yeah.
On the last shot?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, during the climax in 2022.
Yeah, so that was very intentional from the beginning, and yeah, it was in the script. And I think it was a real, like a character almost in the movie.
Yeah.
Something that's in the script clearly is the Trinity sequence, but how scripted that might be is a question I have. And there's a lot of scenes that we could talk about in the film that are brilliant, but this one, I think people are going to remember this for a long, long time. I mean, it was just beautifully done and just so tense, and I loved every second of it. But again, something like that, I can't imagine that every single visual is scripted out.
No, yeah. Okay, yeah, I'll give you the honest story behind that. So when I first assembled the movie, I don't know if you remember this, Mike and Nick, but like when I first assembled the movie, I kind of breezed past that section because, like it would have taken so long, and I only had 4 weeks to assemble the entire cut. And then Chris got COVID, so that was great. And I got COVID, and then I got COVID separately from Chris, so I got an extra week. But then I made it. I finished the entire cut. He told me I didn't have to. But the way I did it is I kind of breezed past that section. So I made like a short cut of it, but it's so funny because we screened it for Emma. Like he likes to screen for Emma very quickly, obviously the producer of the movie and also his wife. And so we screened the movie for Emma, and she was like, wow, that was amazing for like a first pass. And Chris and I had worked on it together, like for at least 2 weeks, I think, before we did it. So it wasn't just my cut. But we skipped over Trinity because he's like, I know this is going to be great. We need to like work on the other stuff. So I remember Emma was like, wow, that was so great. But I was a little underwhelmed by Trinity, like the explosion, because we literally didn't cut it. And we didn't tell her we didn't cut it. So like the bomb just like I wish I had a version. I wish I could watch it again because it's hilarious that she watched it like that. But anyway, so Chris and I waited kind of a while to cut that sequence because he knew that it was going to be great because that's his thing. Like he's so good at that. And that's another reason why it's so nice for me to work with someone who's so confident like him, because he wasn't worried about it, and he was like, we're going to do it together and it's going to be amazing. Like, we need to focus on story and character and like shaping the characters. And so then I forget what week we finally sat down. We just took a week or a few days, maybe it was only 3 days, and we sat down and we did it together, and it was really, really fun because Chris is so good at it. And like, again, my background is not action and tension and like that kind of stuff. So like, I'm still learning that. And he's like an amazing teacher because all of his movies, that's his thing. He's so good at it. So like, we did it together and I added what I could add to it. And he's just like a master at it. So it's just like super collaborative, but he's never like judgmental, or he was just like, we did it together and it was so fun. It was one of the most fun things to cut, like with Chris, because I did not have time to do any of that on my own. But it was very collaborative with Chris, and he is just a master at building tension like that.
Jen, you said that your wheelhouse really is being in rooms with characters.
Yeah.
What is it you love about that? And by extension, would that be one of your favorite scenes in the film, something that took place in a small room?
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, like Mike knows, like one of my favorite scenes that I cut a very long version of that I was very proud of. And Emma loved that scene when we first showed it to her, but it definitely got shorter, was the Casey Affleck scene. Like, that's my shit. Two amazing actors, awkward tension, so many layers of what's happening in that scene. And like Cillian, his performance in that scene is so incredible because it's like the only time you see Oppenheimer kind of like nervous and twitchy, and he plays it so well. And then Casey just like totally delivers that kind of bad guy. And he's just so good. I love that. That scene, I spent way too long on that scene during my assembly, as well as the Truman scene. I just love that stuff. I don't know why. I think that's like why I love editing. It's just like I like human interactions, and those are my favorite scenes to cut.
Awkward human interactions.
Awkward interactions. Yeah, it's my specialty.
Now we know.
And it's like there were so many amazing scenes for me in the movie that were just, yeah, I could have spent like 3 weeks just cutting that scene with Casey and Cillian, although I can cut them quite quickly because I love them so much. So like, but I just want to keep just like mining the footage, and like, I just love it. And same with the Truman scene. Like, I think I made Mike come in the room and I was like giddy to show him my cut of the Truman scene. So like, that's the kind of stuff I just like spend way too much time on that.
You need an awkward moment cut? Call Jen Lane.
Yeah, call me. I'm trying to think of other. I mean, I have so many. I mean, every scene in Room 2022, like, I love that. Like, I just love that whole last section of Room 2022 is so great. And I love every scene with Strauss because Strauss is my favorite character. So every scene with him, I loved cutting. It's like layers of he's acting one way, but then he reveals himself. And how sympathetic do you want people to be? And like, how do you want to reveal him? And I just found like the different onion layers of like his personality and his psychology to be incredibly fascinating. And I actually feel for him. I don't see him as just like a straight villain like some people do. I really like him. Or I just like have so much empathy for him. I see him as this like Willy Loman character who like thinks that he's good at playing this game and he's so not good at it. I don't know. I just like, I really love him. I love that character. So yeah, every scene with him I loved.
I loved them all too. Okay, so after every film, you should take away something with you. You should learn something. What did you learn from working on Oppenheimer?
Well, it's funny, but because I came on late, I was really like nervous about doing the assembly in like 4 weeks, and just, I'd never come on late to a project. And most editors I asked were like, it's horrible, don't do it. So I was super nervous about it. And I actually like thrived on it. I actually really loved it. Like, I feel like it was one of the better assemblies I've ever cut, even though it was such short time. I had such a short time frame instead of the whole shoot. You know, I only had like 3 or 4 weeks. And it was kind of fun to come in and not know. Anyway, it just taught me that like, even though it was like a difficult situation and I was just convinced it was going to be terrible, it was actually great. So, I mean, I guess it's not like a new lesson when you work on movies, like every time you think something is going to be terrible and it's not terrible, but it just taught me that I was able to be really efficient with my time, which is something I can struggle with sometimes. And I was able to just like lock in, get it done in those 4 weeks. And I was really proud of myself for doing that because I was incredibly nervous coming on late. And also because I loved the script so much, like I didn't want to let Chris down. And he was doing me this huge favor by letting me come on late. So I was just, I don't know if that's a lesson I learned or something I took away from it, but
I think that counts.
Yeah.
I'll say that when I started working in editing 15 years ago, film was still the standard. the very first job I did on a movie was to pick up a cam and bring it to the cutting room. And then that was the last time I ever had any exposure to film after that, like, very first foray. And so even though movies I worked on were shot on film, it was a fully digital finishing process. And on this one, it was extremely edifying to have the experience of being able to learn how to do all this stuff. It was always sort of in the back of my mind, but I didn't have the firsthand experience with it. So really learn what the process is, shooting on film, finishing photochemically, and then these two incredible formats, the 70mm 5-perf and the IMAX 15-perf. I never thought that I would ever have an experience like that. And going through it, there were definitely growing pains and things that you have to learn the hard way sometimes. But now it's like, yeah, I wish every job could be done this way, because the end result really is just incredible. And there's nothing more satisfying than to know that you were part of just such a large team. I mean, it helps that the movie's also amazing, but then it looks amazing. It sounds amazing. There's just nothing that compares to that. Seeing the answer print go up for the first time. Wow, that's a journey.
Well, Tom, I can't imagine there's anything new you learned about film, but I could be wrong, but it doesn't have to be film. What did you learn from working on Oppenheimer?
What I learned was that what goes around comes around. Don't put away all this old stuff. You got to retain this because it could happen any minute. And it did. I'm just happy to learn that somebody's out there who's still trying to make movies like this. And not just that he's making it on film, but this movie anyway. And I think that this is very different from all of his other movies, to tell you the truth. But this one really was that classic movie that just isn't made anymore. And it increases in value because of the way it was made. And the way I saw, when everybody goes and watches it, it's just another movie. But we saw it happen. And the way he goes about it, it's such a master filmmaking class. I'm just glad I was there and I could take it. And I got paid for
it. You got paid?
Oh, wow. Damn. I should have gotten paid.
Have you put in all your checks yet?
No, not yet. Yeah, I got to
submit some time cards. For me, it really was two fronts. I mean, to echo what Nick and Tom have said, like, I started in 98 at the beginning of the digital revolution in New York. And it was indie cinema. And we didn't really, on the shows I was working on, film rooms were more rare, and it was really usually a single avid shared by an editor and assistant cutting a picture. And I did film dailies on one show in 2002 with Mark Goldblatt, a show called Bad Company, which was immensely educational, learning how to sync dailies and do daily screenings every day. But I largely kind of avoided working in film, and part of me was like, well, I guess I'm not going to get that opportunity. And then this came around, and it was honestly refreshing because, I've done countless digital shows, challenging digital shows, but after a while, it really just gets to be kind of more of the same, and I'm constantly interested in technical challenges, that we're faced with, but it got to be kind of more of the same. And that's what was really kind of fascinating about this show, is diving in and learning and needing to master a completely photochemical and optical filmmaking approach. Like these guys, I would love to see other filmmakers embrace that photochemical finish, because the products you can get from it are just beautiful, and not to get too cheesy about it, but there's this intimacy with the camera original negative that was in the camera, printed through, and then you screen that print for someone. It's beautiful. And, I would never have gotten this opportunity if not for Chris and his approach, obviously. But that's on the technical side. On the editorial side, the big takeaway I had from this is, we had such varied, beautiful performances in this movie, and, constantly trying to eke out the subtext of the show. But the thing that I learned just watching Jen and Chris and how they work is, you can always abbreviate down. You can always get more from less. And that was really beautiful to see their approach to this, and to how to wrestle all this material down and into such a captivating format was really educational.
Captivating. That's a great word to close out on, because there is no doubt that the imagery in this film, this 70mm IMAX, is captivating. That said, I think it doesn't matter what it was shot on. This is just an amazing picture. You all did collectively a brilliant job. I think like a lot of people, I have a lot of reverence for Christopher Nolan and his work. He's always pushing things and trying new things and yet still embracing older technology, which I love. He's always impeccably dressed. Tell me at least once he came into the cutting room in a tank top and flip-flops.
No, not once.
He dresses for battle, for sure.
No, it's not likely you'll be running into Chris Nolan at a beach volleyball game anytime soon. But you know where you can probably find him? The Oscars. Oppenheimer, as Tom Foligno said, is the kind of movie it feels like they don't make anymore. But they did. And the they would be Jen, Mike, Nick, and Tom, along with Chris Nolan and many other talented filmmakers. Together, they created an epic story about a moment in time that would forever change the world. A heartfelt thank you to Jen, Mike, Nick, and Tom for making the time to talk about Oppenheimer with us today. We did have our share of technical and scheduling difficulties making this happen, but not only was it worth it, I hope we can pick up the conversation again someday. If you've been saying I need to learn Avid Media Composer someday, well, guess what? Someday is here, and there has never been a better time. There are free options for students and low-cost choices for both monthly and annual subscriptions to Media Composer and Media Composer Ultimate. Which one will work best for you? I don't know. Luckily, over on Avid.com, they can sort all that out for you. So take that first step to editorial greatness by clicking that link in the show notes. As always, I do hope you enjoyed this edition of the podcast. I certainly enjoyed making it for you. And if you still need a rough cut fix when Monday rolls around, well, don't forget that there are over 200 episodes in the Rough Cut catalog. So pick one or two that you haven't heard and see what new things you can learn about the art, craft, and career of post-production. We will get things back on the regular Monday track for the next one, but until then, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.